Hi there, and welcome to this short video, which is an effort by the IMM GSM to provide you some support in submitting your financial management assignment for the second semester, as this is a phase-out module and this is your last opportunity to complete this module. Please take time to read the instructions to candidates so that you do not lose any marks unnecessarily and that you submit your project or your assignment as required. It is important to take note of things such as numbering your pages and laying it out correctly, and to make sure that you ensure that your work is your own and is not syndication of someone else's. Okay, once you've taken note of those and the important dates, you should have already completed a significant portion of this assignment. So we're just going to address some important parts that you should have taken note of when providing the answer for each question. In question 1.1 asks you to define a stakeholder and then provide 4 examples. So you need to provide a generic definition of what you understand a stakeholder to be. This is discussed in detail in Study Unit 1 of your Learner Guide. There it also provides examples, and you would need to select 4 of those and list them here. Okay, so 1 mark for defining a stakeholder and 4 for listing 4 separate examples. Be careful not to repeat yourself when listing examples. Question 1.2 then goes on to ask about the cash balance at the end of the January. You're presented here with a couple of transactions of Mr. Big's new marketing consultancy for January. The important thing to understand is that it's asking for a basic cash flow statement. It is not necessary to prepare an in-depth statement of cash flows with operating, investing, and financing activity sections, but simply a flow of cash resulting in a closing cash balance. So what we would be looking for here is a neatly laid out list where we see an opening balance plus receipts less payments, giving you that closing cash balance, showing all components and arriving at that closing balance to get maximum marks. So bear in mind that this is a new business, so our opening balance would be 0. We would then add any receipts that we have identified from the listed transactions, and you must list each receipt labeled so that the marker knows which component that receipt is. Okay, then you would say less payments, and those payments would be listed, arriving at that total payments figure. Okay, and our receipts less our payments would be our closing cash balance, showing all workings there. It then moves on to asking for the FIFO stock valuation method, and it asks you to calculate the cost price of the stock issued on the 7th. Right, so then if we have a look then, we must remember that this table is presented at cost price always. So we need to understand what would be the cost of these 150 units issued. After reading the FIFO theory that is presented to you in Study Unit 3, you would then get a good idea of how to utilize that theory in that first available prices are issued first and then the next available prices. So we had opening units of 100 at 1 Rand, and thereafter we had another 100 at 2 Rand. So we issue those 150 at the first available prices first, and then when those are exhausted, we move to the next available prices. So they are asking then, what would the total cost price be for those 150 units? You need to show all calculations on how you said that 150 would be broken down using the FIFO method. Okay, it's important once again to show all workings there. It then says to name 2 sources from which a company can obtain finance it needs to conduct its operations. Throughout the entire module, you're introduced to the idea of how we can raise capital, both internally and externally. So you would need to discuss then how those 2 sources in terms of finance that you could consult in raising capital for your business. Okay, then in question 2, you are given another list of transactions for April of stock movements, starting with an opening balance, receipts, and sales of stock, and then the closing balance. In the first question of question 2, it asks then for the cost of sales for April. It gives you a nice layout to use, and you must use this layout when presenting your answer. However, the 3 dots detail the required information that you need to fill in from the list of balances given. So it starts with the opening stock. Bear in mind this is discussed in 2.4 point 1 of your learning material in your learner guide. So it's worthwhile consulting that trading section explanation of the income statement. Okay, starting with the opening stock, which is given, plus any purchases. So you would have one amount for your total purchases, but you would be expected to list all the components, or alternatively just open a bracket and show the amounts that you added together from the list of information in arriving at your total purchases figure. Okay. Then it says plus any other charges. Those would be any directly attributable charges that got the stock into its present location and condition, as is explained in sections 2.4.1 of your learning material. So there we would add things like our freight inwards and so on. And we must list this once again to show the marker how I arrived at the other charges figure. Okay. We then would subtract our closing stock. So our closing stock is given. Okay, and opening stock plus your purchases plus those other charges less those closing stock amount gives us our cost of sales for the period. Okay, it then goes on to say, assuming you made sales of 390,000 Rand for April, what would the gross profit be? And in that trading section of the income statement, it explains to you that gross profit is shown at sales less cost of sales, giving you gross profit. So that sales amount less cost of sales, which you've just calculated, giving you gross profit. Remembering it says, show it as it would appear in the trading section. So using a nice columnar format once again to present that answer. It then asks to provide one reason why it is important to effectively manage stock, and throughout your text you need to be able to have ascertained why we need to effectively manage our stock, or put in a little research into your textbook and learner guide, and you'll be able to ascertain that answer. If we look at question 3 then, you're presented with two fixed assets, being the vehicle and the machine. The vehicle is using the straight line method of depreciation, and the machine is using the reducing balance. Your learner guide discusses this in detail in study unit 3, so it's worthwhile consulting that if you haven't yet already. Okay. It then says calculate the book value for the vehicle as at the 31st of December 2013, so that would be our final figure there, but it's given us a nice table to lay out its history from 2010 all the way up until the end of 2013. Okay, with the straight line depreciation method that we're using for the vehicle, it will be worthwhile noticing that our depreciation charge per period would be straight lined or the same per period. The accumulated depreciation is a cumulative balance, so every period we add the depreciation to the last period's accumulated depreciation. So its accumulated depreciation is a cumulative balance of all the depreciations to date added together. Okay, and our book value per period, or our carrying value per period, is just our cost price less the accumulated depreciation at that date, giving you the book value representing the economic benefits left in that asset. Okay. Bearing in mind then with the book value for the machine, the only thing that would change would be using the diminishing balance or the reducing balance of depreciation method. So here your annual depreciation charge would reduce or diminish each period. Okay, and our accumulated depreciation would again be the cumulative balance of all the depreciations added at that point. Okay, please use the formats provided in order to capitalize on marks, but you must show all workings as to how you arrived at certain amounts. So just going back to that question then, if you calculate an amount by saying 400 times by 12%, you must show the marker in brackets just so that you can capitalize on all possible marks so they can see how you arrived at your final answer. In question 4 then, we are then asked to prepare a balance sheet, being one of our fundamental financial statements. And they have given you a partially completed format, which is great. You must present this format as required because it gives you an indication of exactly how many missing items are required to be filled in. So what you would do then is you would go transaction by transaction or information point by information point, and you would then see how does that affect the various elements of the balance sheet. So just giving you an example, if Mr. Smith, the owner, cashed in his pension and deposited 1,010,000 into the business on the 1st of May as his capital contribution. You should know then that I'm looking from the perspective of Mega Munch and the owner is contributing money into the business. So my bank account as the business's bank account is going to increase and his capital contribution is increasing. So Underneath current assets, you would write bank or cash, and you would open a bracket showing the 1,010,000 because there may or may not be other items that affect your bank account. And then underneath equity, they've already filled in capital, and again you would open the brackets. Why am I opening the brackets? Because there are more transactions to come, and there may be other elements that affect each one of these accounts as well. So we're going to show all our workings either in brackets, or we're going to show them below the balance sheet, and you're going to reference them with a note. So you could say, for example, bank note 1, and underneath the balance sheet you could write my workings for workings 1 for bank are as follows. Okay? You would then go transaction by transaction, identifying which elements of the balance sheet it affects, and you would list the account under each one of those elements and show the amount relevant to that account. Okay, so for example, there could be a loan, a non-current loan. You would list loan and you would show the amount. Okay, and be very important that you show all your workings where necessary. Okay, and using this template as provided and using the number of lines as an indication of to what is required. Okay, bear in mind you do not want to accidentally put the wrong accounts under the wrong section. So consult your learning material in study units 3 and 2 just so that you are well aware of what components affect the relevant items of the balance sheet. Okay, if we then go on to question 5, you're presented with some financial statements, and then you are asked to analyze these financial statements using financial ratios. These ratios are given to you in study units 4 and 5, both in your textbook and in your learning material. A great approach to use when answering this type of question is to say, for example, 5.1.1, gross profit margin, and then list the ratio so that you've understood, you're telling the marker that you correctly identified the ratio. So you would say then that the components of the gross profit margin ratio are gross profit over sales, and then you would substitute those with the relevant figures from the information. Okay, and most importantly, your answer must be presented in the correct unit of measure. So for example, the gross profit margin would be presented as a percentage. So our answer must be so much percent. This is opposed to something such as the debtors collection period, which would be presented in the number of days. Okay, so our answer would then be something days. So it's very important that you list the ratio, then show the components substituted, both the denominator and the numerator, and then your answer with the correct units of measure. If you put the wrong unit of measure next to the answer, it's going to show the marker that you have not identified what that ratio tells you. Okay. Question 5.2 then says list 4 categories. At the beginning of study unit 4, you are introduced to what the categories of financial ratios are. You need to identify how they are categorized, and they give them those 4 major topic headings. It's just asking to list, so no need to discuss each of them. It then says discuss the strengths and weaknesses of financial ratio analysis. Bearing in mind this is for 7 marks, so it's not simply listing 1 for each. You need to identify as many strengths and weaknesses as you can, and be careful not to repeat yourself, and make sure that you provide enough information and list the points to show the marker that you've provided at least enough information, separable information, to give you 7 marks worth, assuming that one relevant point is for 1 mark. Alright, so this is just simply to give you some guidance into what not to do, and most importantly, show all your workings and how you arrive at your final answers. Okay, this provides assurance to the marker that you have completed this, and if all else, they can mark your components of your workings if your final answer is incorrect. Okay, should you have any further academic queries or queries on ambiguities of this assignment, please feel free to contact us on academic-ug@immgsm.ac.za. All the best in completing the rest of this assignment, and ensure that you do your very best to arrive at the exam with a comfortable percentage. Thank you so much. Goodbye.